Our work in this area began with a planning grant that we received from DESE, the Systems for Student Success Grant, SFSS, say that fast 3 times. And we had to do a data dive in that process. And so in doing that data dive, we realized we had tons of data, but nothing that consistently showed voice data and really no student voice data in which to do our action plan. So it became very difficult to adopt an action plan when you didn't have the information from those who were trying to impact. And so we, in our work, we began contracted with Panorama Education, which is a company that provides assistance to districts around surveying, and it's been a really great experience. So our past survey data had been fairly uneventful. We'd collect it, maybe we'd look at it, maybe a few central office administrators would say, oh wow, we have to do something about that. But we didn't really have a clear way to take that data and make it actionable. And so I just want to sort of talk a little bit about some of what we've done there. Of course, you can't be expected to read this, so I understand, but I did want to show you this slide because I think what it does is shows you the power of sort of having some of this data. So if you could read it, what it would show you is sort of the dimensions and sort of each school in the district, is that the right slide? And how they sort of came out against these dimensions. So we looked at engagement, belonging, school mindset, school safety, and school learning strategies for students in our spring, which was our first administration. And in our fall administration of this data, we took a closer look at SEL. Sorry about the language, but no matter what we call it, it's sort of the impact of how students feel about their experience. And so what was different is we added emotion regulation, self-efficacy, and self-awareness scales to the survey this time. And what was very interesting about this data is we are able to drill down to the individual student level. And so it really has helped us to do some planning. For example, school adjustment counselors are looking at that data to plan their intervention groups. Teachers are able to drill down into their classroom and see what are the key strategies. Now, as I talked about the SFSS grant, that really looks at looking at non-academic barriers to learning as equal to academic barriers to learning. So we're really trying to blend those. This isn't a two dichotomy kind of thing. So the engagement in the lesson is part of engagement in the classroom. And so this really, and by asking about school learning strategies and those kinds of categories, we're able to look at that. But what's really interesting is our plan for making this data actionable. At least that's what I think is interesting, and I hope you do as well. So there were 4 sort of main components. One is that really doing a lot of advanced planning for our surveying. So we had never done that before. So we sent out letters to all of our stakeholders, sort of making this an event. This is coming. You know, be on the lookout for it. Our assistant superintendent sent out to district and building administrators constant for about 2 months prior to the survey administration. And we do have examples of letters and how we scheduled this. Administrators had to sign up for when they were administering the surveys, so that it was very clear and very managed and very monitored. And we look at it and we'd say, oh, we don't see so-and-such school has signed up. So that sounds like nuts and bolts, but without that level of detail, you do not have a successful survey administration.
Great, thank you. Why don't we stop there for just a moment? It's wonderful to see what's happening in Pittsfield. We'll link it back to the state survey, but Amalia, let me come to you. Would you share for us what's happening in Boston and some of the ways that you see the district supporting school climate?
Sure. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. First of all, I'm really excited that when we looked at Boston's data, that ours was comparable to the state, and so you know, for us that feel good because many times we feel like we're out of place, we're always doing worse than the state, so it feels good. But we're doing several things across Boston public schools. One of the things that we did this year is that we released what we call the Essentials for Instructional Equity. And what the essentials are 4 key areas that we feel that every teacher should employ in their teaching and learning practices to create quality educational experiences for all our students. And so key focus area number 1 of the essentials is creating and maintaining healthy and sustaining learning environments. And the sustaining piece speaks to culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. So some of the work that we're doing also is really focusing with our administrators and school staff, providing deep professional learning on how we employ culturally and linguistically sustaining practices throughout everything that we do in BPS. And so really the first year has been really looking at ourselves as the adults, looking at our practices, looking at bias, and really studying that and how it impacts the work that we do. We're also really rolling out our social-emotional learning standards this year. And in terms of social-emotional learning, we have focused on 4 key components. First of all, explicit instruction. And so really strengthening our explicit instruction efforts, looking at integrating SEL in terms of academic instruction, looking at our support services, and then just building social-emotional learning into our culture and climate efforts. We also have continued our work around our comprehensive behavioral health model that is very, that includes not just counseling, but it includes explicit instruction, and it includes the BMIS measure, and so we really get to see teachers' perspectives of students and really strengthening, and we've seen some very positive data there. We've also been working in terms of culture and climate this year. We were fortunate enough in our collective bargaining agreement with the Boston Teachers Union to get 4 positions that were to do a pilot initiative on restorative practices. And we also received a grant through NIJ to do some work also around restorative practices at about 30 schools. So we're really excited about that. And I mean, I can go on. I think in terms of just, and I'll finish up, in terms of really looking at the whole child, we are looking at physical health of our students as well as our social, emotional, and behavioral health of our students. So we've been teaming up with partners, many of them are here, City Connects, T-Steps, our students who are doing work on BSAC, our parent efforts, and really on trauma-informed practices. So really doing a comprehensive set of interventions to address culture and climate.
Great, thank you, Amalia. So Scott, I'm coming to you with the big one, right? So we heard from Pittsfield, which I think is a wonderful window into how sophisticated we can get with understanding types of learning that students are engaged in, or their experience in learning environments. We hear from Amalia about a comprehensive approach in Boston, really attentive to a full range of learning capacities beyond sort of traditional academics. In both fronts, this is a lot of stuff. And it's a lot of stuff that we don't want to add on to what schools are doing and what students are expected, but we want to integrate to make for a more positive overall learning experience for students will be more successful. How do we get started with all this?
Well, a couple of ideas. One is, I think we need to remember that the school climate dimensions is really a framework. It's not necessarily the only way to operationalize engagement and environment safety. And then the social emotional learning that we throw is also a framework. And I think we have, if we can help, as Anne Marie was saying, we can help identify some key constructs, and this would be the research-based constructs that are actionable and also malleable, things that can be changed. And if we can help link it to the actual data points that we know are going to leverage that particular school's improvement rates. And we know we have this great thing about Massachusetts is all of this data is available. But some of, for example, when I see engagement, that isn't to me actionable yet until we start putting some of the key research constructs like motivation, our students perceiving school as relevant or meaningful, academic self-efficacy, are they feeling confident? So we're getting, instead of just thinking about it as school climate, what we're also saying is our students thriving in this environment. When we start talking about another one is we can tie in career readiness, the whole college career readiness, and we add in just one little dimension. Have you identified career and life goals? Not have you made a decision, but just are you involved in this? And if they aren't, that becomes a marker for us to help the school say, hey, how can we help them start having a future orientation, seeing beyond what they're doing right now? When we talk about environment, we can also talk about their academic stress. Are you feeling able to manage the responsibilities and the challenges that are going on? Their health, just their overall emotional, psychological distress. And I agree that we can look at it. This is all about the environment, by the way. This is all about malleable means. How do we as an environment, as a context, create those conditions within the school for all of our youth to thrive? And then the last piece that I think we can do it, and it could be that it's not necessarily from the state's administration, but encouraging down, as we're seeing at Pittsfield, is how do we get data in an aggregate form that we can understand what's happening with each of our students that our school counselors can use to make sure we're identifying those. It's another element to the early warning indicator that we can have. But also, how do we get this information? I heard families, but what about students? Why can't we give them a profile that says, how are you doing? How are you thriving? And let them have an opportunity to take ownership as well as a sense of understanding about where they are within this process. Now, that may sound more overwhelming, but I think it's a matter of how do we work with the state to set the context and set up a framework at that level, and then how do we encourage schools like Pittsfield to then go in more depth and really follow up on this information in a way that supports their own school's needs in terms of their improvement efforts, but also making sure that every single child graduates college and career ready.
So one of the things I heard, and I don't think I'm summarizing everything you shared, which was wonderful, thank you, but part of this is about identifying need, informing decision-making, and then taking action geared toward improvement, and recognizing that improvement needs to be continuous, and there's going to be fits and starts. Not everything is we're going to get right the first time, but if we're focused on what we're trying to do using data, it certainly is a helpful tool. Let me ask about the measurement piece to all three of you, and maybe Scott, start with you because I know you have a perspective that extends beyond Massachusetts. In the actual measurement of climate and even social emotional learning, have you seen an impact that process has in benefiting students?
Well, yes, in the sense that how we're doing it. So to the extent that we're getting educators information about their students in a way that they're not feeling threatened, in a way that they're looking at it to say, how can we move, how can we improve what's going on, then it has tremendous benefit. Especially when it gets down to the disaggregated where you can see an individual student, we can create supporting indicators to say on those dimensions, the resiliency, social emotional learning, who may be at risk for not making it, and then we can start to build in our type, the type 2, type 3, whatever kinds of supports we might need to support with them. So in those cases where it's actionable and we're identifying, we're seeing some great stuff. I think the idea where Pittsfield was going, I couldn't read the whole slide too, but the idea of being able to take even the early warning indicator data alongside with this data so we can see that the students who are in effect the leading indicators, they're not thriving, they're not feeling as well, and we're starting to see also not attending class, not doing as well. As a whole, that provides the schools with a lot of detail that they can begin figuring out who needs what kinds of support plan. I think, of course, now is the answer. So yes, in those cases, actionable is quite helpful.
Can we come down the line?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we have really been focused on how to make this actionable, and one of the things that we've done to realize these action plans is how we set up what happens with the data. So the data is very transparent, and so it needs to be in order to make this work. So every teacher in our district has access to this data. They have their own logon. You can log on and see their school, and in some cases their classroom and their individual students. And so we built in that the teachers were the ones who, in a group, the leadership team and our PBIS teams, work together to analyze their data and present that to their buildings. And so that was very powerful because it wasn't administrators coming in and saying, this is our data, what do we do about it? And if anyone is interested, we have a template that we developed with Panorama that used to sort of identify the glows and glows that were happening within the data. We had, our data was, we're used to not meeting the state standard, so it was very familiar for us. So our data on this survey was much behind even the states. They look good to us. But really we identified, especially in our secondary schools, some serious concerns that we wouldn't. We had sort of a sense, and so being able to have teachers look at their own data, and for example, around mindset and growth mindset for both students and faculty, they were both low. So our students were saying, we don't know, sort of we don't have a good growth mindset, and the teacher's saying, I don't know how to teach these kids. And so both things were happening at the same time, which was powerful. In one of the presentations in one of our high schools, but no one else had to stand up, a faculty member, and said, this is our problem, we're not. So it was powerful in terms of changing some of that. And the other way to make that actionable, and I would recommend recommend if people haven't done this, is we've built the voice survey. We're calling it voice, so it's interesting to see the state's going to call it vocal. And so we built that right into our district assessment calendar. So every assessment from benchmark to our Fast Bridge data, which is our progress monitoring system, all of it is on a calendar. And so that each building gets their data, has a window that's prescribed in which to analyze, report that data out to their faculty, and then that building administrator, then all 12, we have 12 schools, will then report back to the administrative council after that's happened. So within that, they're building their action steps and then presenting that to their colleagues. And so then there's cross growth across the buildings in the district as well. So that's been very awesome for us.
Thank you. Molly, any examples of data shaping action?
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanted to share with everyone in BPS, we have our own school climate survey that we administer in grades 4 to 12. And then our surveys not just only cover student perceptions, but we get teacher perceptions as well as families. And so part of the actionable piece is how do we compare viewpoints of students, teachers, and families to help us help inform the work that we do. And I want to give acknowledgement to our Office and Data Accountability team that's here today, Jake Stern, Monica Hogan, Annie Leiter, and former BPS staff Erin Byrne. So how have we thought about this? So as we reflect on this work, we think where are the needs in the district, and then what are those needs and how can we curate and or develop resources, supports, interventions for our schools. And then one of the things that I really want to think about is that how do we use this data and look at it from an asset-based perspective. So how do we say what's going well in BPS? How do we highlight the bright spots in terms of the data? And so that's important for us. And for us, because of the work that we're doing around culture and race, how do we break down the data by race and ethnicity? One of the things that we know in Boston Public Schools, we've made a bold statement. We said that we've marginalized a group of students, and those are our Black and brown students, our students in special ed, and our English language learners. So can we look at this data more deeply to see how we're doing among those subgroups, and can that inform the interventions and supports that we provide? How do we look at this data in terms of our suspension data? How do we look at it in terms of our youth misbehavior survey? And again, can we sit down and help our schools to then put effective interventions in terms of their school quality plans? And so these are some of the things that we're thinking about.
Wonderful. Let me ask one more question, then we're going to open it up. So we received information earlier in this event about what's happening at the state level through a survey being administered by the department. Now we're hearing about all the stuff that's happening locally to sort of target and tailor the work that you want to do to your individual context. Any thoughts on how we begin to bridge the two, or the primary use you see in what's happening at the state level? And I'll just open it up, please.
I'd be glad to answer that. That's a dilemma for us. We're really struggling because it's not that the state data isn't important, but because we've embarked on this, it can get really confusing and dilute the message if you have too much survey data. Particularly when it's very easy when you look at poor results, poor favorable responses, people are going to automatically choose the ones they like best. And so at this point, we haven't released to all of our buildings the state survey data, because we really are still trying to plan that. And the user friendliness of the data that we do have, where you can just click on a question and have it show all by special needs students, by ELL students, by every possible economically disadvantaged, that has been very usable for us, and we don't yet have that kind of information from the state. So.
All right, I appreciate you sharing. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Well, when I look at our survey, there are key areas where both surveys do overlap, where we have some areas that the state might consider are, we have in terms of value of learning, So for example, under value of learning, overall, how important is school to you? How often do you use ideas from school in your daily life? We also have other questions in the area of civic participation, social perspective taking. So under social perspective taking, how often do you attempt to understand your friends better by trying to figure out what they are thinking? How often do you try to think of more than one explanation for why someone else acted as they did? We have questions around grit and growth mindset, appreciation for the arts, exposure to the arts, and positive affect. So under positive affect, how often are you enthusiastic at school? On a normal day in school, how confident do you feel? So again, where might be some areas for alignment? I think the same as Pittsfield. We're trying to figure out how do we use the state data when we have our own data. It might be a good place to do some comparisons. I'm just wondering though, if you start asking questions, the same questions to students, what will that do in terms of the outcomes?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that it's a challenge. The state is doing some tremendous work and putting together some great infrastructure. As districts go at it alone, there needs to be some place for communication so that no one's starting from scratch, but they're building on each other's efforts. And there's a dialogue between the state and the districts about how data is being used, how it can be used, how it should be used. And that way we can diffuse some of the innovative ideas that are going on throughout the state. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have in this space is where are districts, where are you getting your information, and how can we align it in a way that is best and that you're not making the same mistakes others make.
Great, so let's open up to questions. Please.
I don't know if this is the right time, but I'll ask anyway. This I see as the next dimension of accountability for districts, and so thoughts about, from really anybody in the room, about how this will be funded. I have such a need in my district, and we are in SFSS as well, and I cannot say that 5 times fast. But we have a huge need for adjustment counselors and additional school counselors in my district that maybe my town council may not see, recognize, and appreciate. But I see this as another layer for accountability, and I'm going to struggle with balancing the emotional and psychological needs of our students with the academic rigor that's expected.
So let me break this down. I think there's a couple of questions there. First and foremost, the panel, how are you supporting expanded work in school climate or other social emotional learning activities? Would you care to share?
Glad to. So we have been, we're a district that uses PBIS as a lens through which to look at a lot of these issues and sort of also you don't have school climate teams, PBIS teams, social emotional learning teams, so we sort of at this point are putting it all through that. And so those teams are also looking at restorative practices. I also wanted to address another piece of what you said. I, as a supervisor of school adjustment counselors, would never say that they're not needed, but in this work, I think what we really need to do is help teachers to implement social emotional learning in their classrooms and to really integrate that in the fabric of the work. So that would, even though, if there's any press, don't put this out, even though I would not ask for any more school adjustment counselors around this, I would be looking at how do we integrate this more into the life of the students every day, all students, because our data really showed that social emotional learning for kids that we thought were doing okay, they're not really doing as okay as we thought. So self-efficacy and all of that was much lower. When I went in and looked at our AP students, our honor students who were doing academically well, their emotional needs were not in the same place. And so I totally lost your question.
Well, I didn't ask it. I think Chad did.
I think that's very helpful. I'm going to keep zeroing down, and actually let me share too, just with the Excel network, which admittedly is social emotional learning on school climate that Cliff referenced and Rennie Center is helping support with 9 districts across the state. Focus right now is prioritization and reallocation of funding. Before we even get into a conversation about what additional funding might be necessary, it's critically important to say there's a lot of assets and resources already in schools and in districts, and with a little bit of capacity building, a little bit of training, targeting the focus of educators on those particular needs can be done without additional resources.
Yeah, I just want to follow up and maybe a counterpoint. is that
Okay.
in the national work I do with a survey that students get to see how they're doing and the teachers get it as well, we've had on more than on one occasion using these kinds of resiliency factors, their top students come out as the ones that are suffering the most. And they get really frustrated and they call up and they say, why are you telling me my top student is not doing well? Well, go ask them. We've also had on more than one occasion them coming back and saying, oh, we didn't know, right? And so in one case, the principal came up and said, you told us our valedictorian was a problem, and we're like, how can that be? And we found out she just tried to commit suicide, right? So we do need school counselors because there's a lot of additional things that are going to be happening here that as we find out.
Did you forget to don't quote me?
Well, I'm not quoting, no, I didn't mention your name. Her name is, no, what I'm saying though is that we do need a whole school approach, and we need our teachers not to be, they need to be confident to go into those discussions, and they're only going to be confident if they know right here when it gets difficult, I'm going to be able to rely on my school counselor to help with. I just want, can I make one other point while I have the floor, just to steal it for a moment?
Absolutely.
Another area that I think we need to be focusing on is the adults and the educators specifically, as you were saying. And I would like to see, and I saw that the state's coming up with a survey around that, but I'd like to see the survey around caring and encouraging behavior. And those are two key words. I'm not interested, unfortunately, about whether students feel good. I'm interested in whether they feel capable. Okay? Those are two different things. And when teachers are just helping you feel good, I don't know that they're encouraging them to do their best. And I also believe that there are certain factors that get involved in whether a teacher can be as good as they can be. And it's not, and part of it is, do you just feel competent in doing the subject matter? Working with my, don't quote me, we do have the mics off now. Meeting with an engineering teacher this last week for parent-teacher conferences and saying, how are you helping my daughter get interested in engineering? Well, we're building bridges. But that doesn't get her interested in engineering. Well, it's the best I can do. So he's not doing the best he could do, right? And I'd like to see that, but it's also, they have to deal with youth that are different than them. You know, you talked about just the boomer, non-boomer. Let's just take that. We've also got other issues. They're not used to that. And so are they feeling confident in that divide? Do they have stress going on? You've got all these pressures about what's going on, about their health and other areas. I'd love to be able to have educators take a look at themselves in a way that's valuing the fact that they are such a key component to this. And how do we help you thrive in this world as well? Not just hold back and say, oh, you're doing fine. We can always improve. So what does that look like? So I'd like to see just another dimension take place in this whole assessment.
So my takeaway to make sure that you two remain friends
We're going to be friends.
is that it's critically important to build up the capacity of all educators within learning settings to own responsibility for this, while recognizing that different positions within schools have unique sets of responsibilities that can be leveraged to enhance the work. Please.
So this is wonderful work. I so appreciate everything that's been said here. Thank you. We're talking about a lot of survey data, which is about how individuals perceive the climate, sort of an ongoing climate. And I'm thinking about a different level, which is responsiveness to events that happen in the school. You know, we might have called it conflict management in the past, but I'm looking at schools. What happens when either something happens externally, like all the immigration threats, or where something happens internally, where there's conflict between two departments or parents and the principal. All these things are really big in terms of the climate, I think, overall, particularly for the staff and the adults. So sometimes the students don't know that conflict is going on. But I'm just wondering, how do we think about assessing some of the, and a lot of this is leadership. How does a principal manage the conflicts that are going on in their school, or how does the superintendent manage the conflicts that happen in the district? How do we start to think about that kind of responsiveness to events, things that happen, et cetera, that are punctual?
And I always have something to say, so go ahead. It'd be nice to hear from you.
Well, I think if we focus on thriving as the key piece, it begins with relational basis. And when we have youth that feel connected to each other in classroom experiences, we get a lot less bullying. We get a lot more focused on learning how to learn rather than acting out. If we continue that to the faculty, how are we helping empower our educators to take risks, try new things, feel that they have the support that they need to be successful, and the resources? It then takes down, so we're in, not that we're just not only preventing, but we're creating a very different way of structuring the education experience so that we get fewer of those conflicts. And when those conflicts occur, it's coming from a place of, oh, we need to protect this thriving environment military in gang in South Milwaukee, where we've got all kinds of gangs, and it was the students who made it a safe building because they realized this was the safest place they needed to be, and they agreed with the principal, we need to protect it. And so you had strife, but you had a collective that were coming together in order to work on that. So it is a complex piece, but I do think it still comes down to these same issues and looking at it not just as the student, but looking at it as the whole environment.
Yeah.
Please.
I just want to respond. As a former principal, I mean, that's the job. That's the work.
Yeah.
It's every single day. And it's not a smooth, operation. But once the staff, the teachers, the maintenance, the cooks, are all on the same page or a similar page with the leadership, which hopefully is aligned, with the direction of the district, the students get a sense that we know what's going on, and that that their interest is our best interest. And all it does take, as the gentleman over here said, it just takes a few detractors to make that unstable or not work. So that is our job, is to have our hand on the pulse of what's going on in the school with the adults in the building, and then that will feed into the needs of the schools.
Okay.
So I'm interested in the relationship of this to the academic policies that are in place, and so it seems like we're turning our attention at this point more broadly to the social question. And I'm wondering whether you have any comment about how academics can frame the impact of the climate of our schools, and whether we reframe how we engage academically so that
So a couple of thoughts that I have. One is we're also doing some parallel work on our education evaluation system, and sort of really looking at how administrators use the evaluation and observation tools in order to start to shape and make changes within the academic environment. So that would be one place, and the administrators throughout our district are really have been embarking on a research for better teaching, really looking at that and calibrating and examining that so that we're having a consistent approach. The other piece is through professional development. On our last staff survey, we also, I guess dismal would be the adjective to sort of use to look at what our teachers thought around their ability to integrate into their classrooms, their social emotional learning and universal design components, so universal design, as probably most of you know, really has school engagement as a factor within that academic environment. So we're really trying to blend all of the inclusive practices to sort of address what's happening academically in the classroom, to use best practice teaching techniques to address some of the social emotional learning and developing some PD and involvement in some of DESI's academies to do that work.
For Boston Public Schools, one of the things that we've done with those essentials of instructional equity that we talked about, we just developed a document. The 4 areas are safe, healthy, and sustaining learning environments. Second area is access and agency. The third area is cognitively demanding tasks. And the fourth area is assessing for learning. So what we've done is we've created a document that shows how social emotional learning lives throughout each of those 4 essentials, and giving practical teacher examples as well as student examples. What does this look like in terms of the learning environment and academics? How does it live and breathe? So that's one piece. Just like Pittsfield, a lot of professional learning experiences that for our teachers and administrators to help them think about those pieces, and also looking at our teacher evaluation rubric and aligning it to our essentials, and then providing teachers with key examples of what that looks like in the classroom and in actual practice.
Okay. So a couple of quick comments as I was kind of started the conversation saying, how do we really define these constructs? We know that when students, we've got some good data saying that as students establish their own career and life goals, and this is kind of happening through career development activities like our MICCR or career advising that the state's launching, and is happening nationally. Once they establish career and life goals, all of a sudden school becomes more relevant. And that seems to be a key component that drives them into taking the MICCR, recognizing that they need to do not only MICCR, but maybe early access to college, they've got to get some additional leadership skills, because they're now aligning their learning opportunities to help them achieve those goals. And that's the part that I think is so missing in our discourse, is that we keep focusing on, oh, we got to do this for kids, we got to do this for kids, we got to do this for kids. But what happens when we explain and give them an opportunity to learn how this all works, right? And the social emotional learning really becomes that place. We've got great data showing that knowing what that middle schooler looks like on the social emotional learning, we can predict their academic outcomes well in high school. So this is a driver, but the question is, how do we make it actionable? And I think it's a community effort, whole school effort, but it's also helping youth really start to drive through this. And it relates directly to the academics, even to the point that we then get in the way, because they need to keep learning beyond what we did right at the end.
I think that's a nice place to close. Please join me in thanking our panel.